You're never going to use wallpaper again after you see how easy this DIY is. I started by wiping the walls in our RV with TSP, but you can do this project on any type of walls. And then I wiped them dry, and I opened up some leftover paint from our bathroom. It's called Calder Green from Benjamin Moore. I tried using a foam roller to apply the paint directly to a stamp, but it was too much paint, so then I tested it out by rolling the paint on a piece of paper and pressing the stamp into it, and that worked really well. You want to make sure you have a very thin layer of paint. The paper was a bit thin, so I ended up switching to a plastic plate, and I would roll out a thin layer and press the stamp into the paint and then press it on the wall. I altered between 3 different dinosaur stamps, and I stamped them with the paint all throughout my son's bunk nook in our RV, but this could be a fun project for any room or wall in your home. It's way more cost effective than wallpaper, and it turned out super well. Here is the final look of our painted stamp wall. I can't believe this was all from a stamp. What do you think? Would you give this one a try?
Today I'm sharing a very easy project that looks amazing when done. The first step is to attach the stencil to the wall with painter's tape. Take a good amount of spackle on the putty knife and drag it across the stencil. Make sure to fill in any spots you may have missed. Carry on to your other stencils. Remove the stencils, and if you have gotten spackle outside of the stencil, wipe it off the wall. Follow the instructions on your spackle for drying time. Ours was 24 hours. When it is dry, paint over the entire wall from the top to the bottom with your original paint color. Let dry. Now enjoy. I did the best I could to show you how great it looks, but for some reason the camera does not pick it up as well as the human eye. I can guarantee you though that it looks lovely and it is very visible. It isn't too busy, but it took what was once an unremarkable wall and turned it into something special.
If you have damaged walls like I did, this budget-friendly repair requires no drywall skills whatsoever. I started with this bathroom that had mosaic tiles stuck on the wall as decorative elements. It just wasn't the style that I was looking for, but removing them and removing the old towel bar caused damage to the wall. In order to cover it up and also to give the bathroom the look that I was looking for, I ran down to the hardware store and picked up 2 sheets of beadboard. Then I measured and cut the beadboard down to size using a table saw. I attached it to the wall with my nail gun. It took no time at all. Since the beadboard is 4 feet wide, but my wall is longer than this, I needed to cut my second sheet and line it up next to the first. The next step was to add a wood border to the top. I used very inexpensive common board, and the size I used was 1x8. I measured the length I needed and cut it to size. Then I painted the top of it before attaching it to the wall. This way I didn't have to paint the top when it was in place, because I'd surely end up painting the wall accidentally if I tried that. When I attached the board, there was a small gap between the wood and beadboard, but it was easy to fill this gap using paintable caulking. Once that dried, I got started with painting. Here, you could really change the look of your room by painting the entire thing a dark gray or even black to make it look modern, or a bright blue for a nautical or coastal look, but I stuck with white for this particular bathroom. In order to finish off my beadboard accent, I added hooks. After that, I added my towels and a new shower curtain, and my quick little bathroom upgrade was complete. I really like the way it looks, and I'm glad I was able to remove the old mosaic tile on the wall without having to patch drywall or call someone in to make repairs. I wanted to update this condo bedroom on a budget and in one day. I love the way picture frame moldings look, and I started by taping off a general idea of where molding would go and what the picture frame boxes would look like. I wanted mitered corners, so I set the saw at a 45-degree angle and started cutting my pieces. When I cut the corresponding pieces, like the 2 sides or the top and bottom, I stacked the pieces together and cut them together so that their sizes were truly identical. I had marked the wall with a pencil where my pieces needed to go, so the next step was to apply my adhesive on the back side of the molding and attach it to the wall, using a level to make sure that everything was straight. I would recommend not adding too much adhesive so that it doesn't get all over the wall when you end up pushing the molding onto the wall itself. I did have a spot where I had to go around an outlet. In this area, I just made straight cuts at the top and bottom of the outlet area. I also made sure that my mitered corners were as tight as possible, and they really did go together very well, and any small gap was filled with some caulking in the next step. I started caulking the places where the molding met the wall to cover up that small gap and give it a professional finish. I caulked it on the inside and outside of all of the picture frame sections. Sometimes the caulking goes on perfectly smoothly, but sometimes it just doesn't. Either way, all I did was run my finger along the area to smooth down the caulking. Once I had the molding in place, it was ready for paint. We ended up with this dark gray with a bit of purple undertone. I used a Wagner paint sprayer that I had received from another project, and I was able to get this wall painted incredibly fast as a result. In this room, I also replaced the flooring and added nice big baseboards. And here's the result. I love the way the furniture sits in relation to the picture frame molding, and I love the way the accent wall makes the room look. Most of all, I love that I did it myself and that it cost under $50. I wanted to create a dimensional wood wall with various shades of color to fill this space. Rather than spending time cutting pieces of wood, I decided to use wood shims for my project. I used both long and short shims because I didn't want my textured wall to be uniform. I stained the wood shims using a water-based stain. This has less odor than an oil-based one. The color I chose was antique walnut. I got to work staining my wood pieces using a paper towel at first, but then switched to a rag because it ultimately worked much better for me and didn't fall apart the way the paper did. I stained the shims in varying degrees, some with just one light coat and others with up to 7 coats to make them nice and dark. I started attaching the stained wood shims to the wall using construction adhesive. I found it best to first place the long pieces in a random pattern on the wall and then overlay these with the shorter pieces. This way, I was building up the wall dimensionally as well as varying the color throughout. I worked my way up the wall, stopping a few times along the way to stain more shims. I really used a lot more shims than I originally expected. It was easy and fun putting these on the wall. It really felt like creating my own art masterpiece. There were some gaps between the pieces, and so I had to cover these with smaller pieces at the end. When it came to the light switch on the wall, I just worked right up to the switch. And then the wall was done. I love the way it looks. I'm still deciding if I want to just leave the wall the way it is or if I want to put a piece of framed artwork over it. So, for 2 days worth of work and about $120 in materials, I was able to transform this wall into something that I really love. I wanted to add some visual interest to this small corner of my room. I happened to have some leftover 1x2 brick molding, which I had used for a different project. I made sure to cut my pieces in 3 different lengths. One was 5.5 inches, then 8.5 inches, and the largest size was 11.5 inches. Once I had my pieces cut, I gave them a quick coat of paint and made sure to paint the edges because those looked raw and brown from cutting them. When they were dry, I laid them out on the floor and played around with patterns and designs because I wanted my final design to look somewhat random and to have varying lengths of board along the wall. Once I was happy with my design, I stacked up my pieces and I started adding them to the wall itself. You can add liquid nails to the back of your pieces and then use a nail gun to put them in place, but I just went ahead and used the nail gun straight away. I attached the pieces to the right side of my corner first, putting the pieces all the way up against the wall. I then created a spacer using the exact same block and just angled it on its side instead of flat. I used the spacer so that I could have even spacing between my accent wall pieces. Once the accent pieces were on the wall, I then needed to cover up the holes left by the brad nailer. Once that paintable caulking was dry, I added a little more touch-up paint to make sure that everything looked nice and fresh. I love the way these little accent trim pieces give some life to a wall space that would otherwise be unusable because of its size. I love the versatility. You could make this as tall as you want, have it go from the ceiling all the way to the floor, or make it as small as you want to just be the same size as your window. I hope this inspired you to use your leftover scraps in a creative way and perhaps build a variable height accent wall like this one.